I was dying in slow motion, and nobody in that house wanted me to figure out why. My name's Roland McAfee. I'm 68 years old, retired structural engineer, widower going on 11 years, and until about 6 months ago, I would have told you my biggest worry was whether the maple in the front yard could survive another ice storm. Now I know better. Now I know a man can sit at his own kitchen table, eating food his only daughter prepared with her own hands, and be murdered in installments. Let me back up. The trouble started the way most slow disasters start. Quiet. So quiet you don't even notice the dial moving. Last spring I began waking up with my hands shaking. Not bad, just enough that the coffee cup would clink against the saucer. I figured age. 68 isn't ancient, but it isn't 24 either, and my doctor had been muttering about Parkinson's screenings for years. So I made a note to call the clinic and forgot about it the way you forget things when you're alone and there's nobody to remind you. Then came the nausea. I'd eat a perfectly normal supper, my daughter's pot roast, say, which she'd been making since she was 14 years old and had won a 4-H ribbon. 4 and an hour later, I'd be on my knees in the upstairs bathroom, retching until my ribs ached. I blamed the meat. I blamed my stomach. I blamed everything except the woman who'd cooked it, because what kind of father blames his daughter for poisoning him? The memory thing was what scared me. I'd walk into the garage, looking for a wrench, and stand there 10 minutes trying to remember if I was looking for a wrench, or my keys, or my own shoes. One afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and forgot, halfway there, where I was going, pulled over on the shoulder of Route 9, and just sat there crying into the steering wheel. 68 years old, crying like a child. Because I thought my mind was going. Here's the thing nobody ever tells you about losing your wife. You don't just lose her. You lose the person who watched you, the person who'd say, Roland, you've lost weight. Or, honey, your color's off. When Helen died of pancreatic cancer back in 2015, I lost my mirror. After that, for a decade, the only person who saw me up close was my daughter, Bridget. And after she married Logan Wexler 3 years ago, the only people who saw me up close were Bridget and Logan, because they moved in with me. That part was my fault. Or maybe not my fault, but my decision. The house is too big for one man, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a half-acre lot in Ridgefield, Connecticut, which is the kind of town where realtors call cottages estates and put a comma in every price tag. When Bridget came to me 18 months after the wedding and said Logan had lost his sales job and they were drowning in rent in Stamford, I told her, come home. Come home, sweetheart. Live with me. The house is yours someday anyway. That sentence. The house is yours someday anyway. That sentence. The house is yours someday anyway. I've replayed that sentence in my head 1,000 times. I said it standing in my own kitchen, holding a mug of coffee Helen bought at a craft fair in 1998, and I had no idea I'd just fired the starting pistol on the worst race of my life. So they moved in. Bridget took her old bedroom, redone for a married couple. Logan converted the den into what he called his office, though I never saw him do much work in it. He'd been let go from a pharmaceutical sales position. He wasn't shy about telling that story, blamed his manager, blamed corporate, blamed everyone but himself. Logan was 36, good-looking in a slick way, the kind of man who'd shake your hand too hard and laugh too loud at his own jokes. I never warmed to him. But Bridget loved him, and Bridget was all I had, so I tried. For the first year, it was fine. Bridget worked part-time at a children's bookstore in town. Logan claimed to be doing consulting. The mortgage on the house was paid off years ago. Helen and I had been careful people, so I covered the property taxes and the utilities, and they covered groceries and gas. Reasonable. Adult. Fine. Then last March, I started getting sick. And by July, I was a ghost. I'd lost 23 pounds. My hair was coming out in the shower, clumps you could plug a drain with. My right hand shook so bad I'd given up writing checks. Bridget had taken over paying the bills. Sweet of her. Very helpful. Logan had started calling me Pop, which he never used to do, and helping me up out of chairs, which he never used to do. And I, fool that I was grateful. grateful for the help, grateful that my family was rallying around me in my decline. The neighbor noticed before I did. Across the street lived a woman named Idris Cavendish, 81 years old, widowed twice, a retired piano teacher with hair the color of steel wool and a stare that could strip paint off a barn. Helen used to bring her Christmas cookies every year. After Helen died, Idris kept the tradition going in reverse. She'd bring me a tin of shortbread every December, and we'd sit on her front porch in the spring and talk about the squirrels and the politicians in that order of importance. In August, on a Tuesday I'll never forget, I walked to my mailbox in my bathrobe at 10 in the morning. I was too tired to dress. Halfway down the driveway, I had to stop and put my hand on the lamppost to keep from going down. Idris was across the street watering her hostas. She set down the watering can and walked over to me on those bird-thin legs, and she took my wrist in her hand, and she felt my pulse like a country doctor from 1952. She said, "Roland, come sit on my porch." I sat. She brought me water in a tall glass, not from the tap, from a sealed bottle she opened in front of me. I remember that detail because at the time it struck me as odd. She watched me drink the whole glass. Then she leaned forward and she didn't waste a word. "How long has this been going on?" "What? This?" She gestured at me. The robe, the shaking, the way my collarbone was sticking out like a coat hanger. "How long?" 5 months, maybe. 6. And the doctor says, "Haven't really been. Bridget keeps saying she'll drive me. We haven't gotten there yet." Her eyes went small. I want you to understand what I mean by that. Idris had blue eyes, watery and pale, the kind that looked dreamy in photographs. But when they went small, they went hard as river stones. She said, very quietly, "Roland, who lives in your house right now besides you?" I told her. She nodded once, as if I'd confirmed something she'd already worked out on her own. She said, "You're going to do me a favor. You're going to tell your daughter and her husband that I've invited you to come to my niece's house in Florida for a week. The niece is real. Her name is Marjorie. She'll cover for you. You're going to pack a bag, get on a plane, and not get on the plane." I stared at her. "You're going to stay at the Marriott Courtyard out by the airport for one night. The next morning, you're going to come back into town quiet as a mouse. You're going to stay in my guest room, and you're going to watch your own house from my front window. Idris, what are you, Roland?" She put her hand on my knee. Her hand was light as paper. "I buried 2 husbands. The second one was poisoned by his daughter. It took me 4 years to prove it. By then, she'd already moved on to me. I'm still here because I figured it out and because I have the constitution of a tank. You don't. You will be dead by Christmas." "I want to tell you," I argued. "I want to tell you," I said, "no. My daughter loves me. My son-in-law is a decent man. Idris, you're being paranoid. I want to tell you I was a good father who couldn't imagine such a thing." But I'd already imagined it. Some part of me, somewhere under the fog and the trembling, had been screaming it for weeks. The way Logan watched me eat, the way Bridget wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she set the plate down, the way they whispered in the kitchen at night when they thought I was asleep upstairs, the way the life insurance papers I'd never asked to update had appeared on my desk one Sunday afternoon, with Logan saying, "Pop, you might want to take a look at this, just for peace of mind." I sat on Idris's porch for a long time. A cardinal landed on her bird feeder and ate its fill and flew off. Eventually I said, "Florida. When?" She said, "Saturday." That gave me 4 days. 4 days to act normal in a house where I was being killed. 4 days to swallow whatever they put in front of me and smile and say thank you. I won't lie to you. Those were the longest 4 days of my life. Every meal was a calculation. I learned to push food around. I learned to spill coffee on purpose. I learned to take a bite, chew, and then cough into my napkin. I'd been an engineer for 40 years. I knew how to solve problems. I just hadn't expected my final problem to be eating without dying. Friday night, Bridget made meatloaf. She set the plate down in front of me and she said, "Daddy, you've barely been eating. You have to keep your strength up." And she watched me. She watched me lift the fork, and I looked at my daughter, my only child, the little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read Goodnight Moon one more time. And I thought, you know exactly what's on this plate. And I took a bite. And I smiled, and I said, "It's wonderful, sweetheart." Saturday morning, Logan drove me to Bradley International. He carried my suitcase. He hugged me at the curb. He said, "Have a great trip, Pop. Send pictures." I told him I would. I went inside the terminal. I went through the motions of getting to my gate. I waited 15 minutes. Then I walked back out, took an Uber to the Marriott courtyard like Idris had instructed, paid in cash, and slept 12 hours straight on the cheapest bed in Hartford County. Sunday at dawn, she picked me up in her 2011 Buick Century. She drove like a woman who'd never gotten a ticket in her life because she'd never given anyone the chance to give her one. We pulled into her garage with the door already going up and going down again. I went inside through her kitchen. I climbed up to her guest room, and from the window of that guest room, behind a sheer curtain, I could see directly into my own dining room, my own living room, my own driveway. That was Sunday morning. By Sunday night, I had begun to understand the shape of what was being done to me. The cars started arriving at 9 o'clock, not 1 or 2, 7, 8, 9 cars, parked all up and down my street and in my driveway and on my lawn. Men in their 30s and 40s, a few women, all of them dressed for a casino night. Logan was at the front door greeting them like the host of a wedding. Bridget was behind him with a tray of drinks. My drinks. She was pouring my single malt for strangers and laughing. Idris brought me a sandwich and a cup of tea and sat in the rocking chair beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. We just watched. By 10 o'clock, the dining room table had been covered in a green felt cloth and turned into a poker table. The living room had 2 other tables going blackjack, it looked like, and something I couldn't quite see. There was a man at the bar with a cash box. There was a woman in a tight dress moving between tables with a notepad like a cocktail waitress. Logan was working the room like a cruise director. Bridget was sitting on the arm of the sofa beside a man I didn't recognize, laughing at something he said, her hand on his knee. I felt Idris's hand on my shoulder. She said, "There's more. Keep watching." Around 11, Logan went out to the garage. He came back leading a man I'd never seen before. Older man. Heavy. Expensive suit. He sat at the dining room table, and Logan sat down with him, and they spread papers out, and they began to talk in low voices. I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. Because at one point, Logan pointed at the wall. Then he pointed at the staircase. Then he pointed at the bay window. He was showing the man the house. The man was nodding. The man took out a pen, and Logan slid a piece of paper across the felt, and the man wrote something on it, and they shook hands. And I knew. I knew the way you know. When a bridge truss is going to fail before it fails. I had spent 40 years reading Load and Stress, and the load on my life right then was clear as a bell. My son-in-law was selling my house, not after I died. Before, he was selling it out from under me with a forged deed or a forged power of attorney, while I was supposedly in Florida and very conveniently about to be discovered dead on my return from a tragic and unforeseeable medical collapse. I felt my chest go tight. I started to stand. Idris pulled me back down into the chair, hard, with more strength than her arms should have had. She said, "Not yet." "There. Yes. They are. And if you call the police right now, do you know what happens?" I stared at her. "You'll have prevented a crime that hasn't quite finished yet. They'll deny everything. The buyer'll claim he didn't know. Your daughter will cry. Your son-in-law will smile that smile. You'll have a house full of gamblers cited for misdemeanors, and you'll go home tomorrow and try to live in that house with the people who tried to kill you, with no proof of what they were really doing. Roland, you need to let it run. You need to let them write the whole confession themselves. She was right. God help me, she was right. I went back to the window. The poker game ran until 2 in the morning. The man with the papers left at 1 with a copy of something tucked under his arm and a thick envelope going the other way into Logan's jacket pocket. The cocktail waitress was kissing a man in my kitchen. By midnight, somebody threw up in my front hedge at 1:30. Bridget, my Bridget, danced on the dining room table at 1:45 with her shirt unbuttoned here, while my dead wife's china hutch stood 3 feet away watching. I was past crying by then. I was somewhere colder. Monday morning, I called my old college roommate, Pierce Holloway. Pierce had been a corporate lawyer his whole career, retired now to a horse farm in Wilton. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting once. When I was done, he said, "Roland, I'm going to give you the best advice you'll ever get. Don't call the police yet. Call a private investigator named Sutherland Avery. He's expensive and he's worth it. And keep your phone on silent at all times in that guest room. Do you understand me?" I understood. Sutherland Avery arrived at Idris's back door Monday afternoon. 50-something, soft-spoken, looked like an accountant. By that evening, he had installed 4 small cameras inside my house. Don't ask me how. He went in through the basement bulkhead while Logan and Bridget were out at lunch. He placed 1 camera in the dining room, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the living room, and 1 in Logan's office. He hooked them to a cellular router he hid in the attic. By Monday night, I could watch my own house in real time on a laptop in Idris's guest room. What I saw over the next 11 days, I will carry to my grave. I watched Bridget put something into my coffee. Not every cup. Maybe 1 in 3. She'd stand at the counter, glance over her shoulder, take a small brown bottle out of the cabinet above the refrigerator, and tap a single drop into my mug before she carried it to the dining room. I watched her do it on Tuesday. I watched her do it on Wednesday. I watched her do it on Thursday. I watched her do it on Thursday. I watched Logan on a phone call in his office say the words, "He's not going to make it through November. We just need him to sign the medical directive first. After that, it's just a matter of timing." And then he laughed. I watched my son-in-law receive a man in a cheap suit at the back door at 11 o'clock at night, and I watched him hand that man $1,000 in cash, and I watched that man hand him a notarized document. I watched Logan slide that document into a folder labeled Roland in his desk drawer. I watched Bridget, on Wednesday afternoon, sit alone in my living room and stare at the wall for 45 minutes. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She didn't fray. She just stared. Once she reached up and touched her own face, the way she used to do when she was a little girl in trouble and didn't know what to do. I almost broke that day. I almost called her cell phone just to hear her voice and beg her to stop. Idris caught me with my hand on the phone, and she took the phone away from me without a word. By the second weekend, Sutherland Avery had built me a file. 47 pages, time-stamped video, audio transcripts, a copy of the forged power of attorney Logan had been using to set up the sale to buyer, was a man named Reggie Doland, a slumlord out of New Haven who specialized in distressed properties he could flip fast and quiet. Pierce Holloway pulled in a contact at the state's attorney's office. The state's attorney pulled in a contact at the Connecticut State Police. By Sunday night, I had a meeting set for Tuesday morning at the Major Scrimes Unit in Meriden. But before any of that, I had one more night to live through. Saturday night, Idris came up to the guest room with a glass of wine for each of us. We sat in the rockers and we watched my house. The lights were on in every window. Logan was hosting another gambling night. The cars were stacking up. The music was thumping. And, on the screen of Sutherland's laptop, I watched my daughter, sober at the kitchen counter, take the little brown bottle out of the cabinet, look at it for a long time, and put it back without using it. She didn't poison the coffee that night. Not because I wasn't drinking it. She didn't know I wasn't drinking it. She thought I was in Florida. She just stopped. For one night. I'll tell you the truth. That moment hurt worse than the poisoning, because it meant some part of her knew. Some part of her had always known, and she'd done it anyway, almost every other day, for months. Tuesday morning, I sat in a conference room in Meriden with 2 detectives, an assistant state's attorney, Pierce Halloway, and Sutherland Avery. I told them everything. I showed them everything. The lead detective, a woman named Henrietta Cosgrove with 26 years on the force, looked through Sutherland's file and said 3 words. We've got them. The plan was elegant. I would fly back from Florida Thursday evening, exactly when Logan and Bridget were expecting me. I'd act sick and confused. I'd let them put me to bed. I'd pretend to drink the tea Bridget would inevitably bring me, and at 8 a.m., Friday morning before they'd had time to do anything else, the state police would come through the front door with a warrant for everything. The property, the documents, the brown bottle, all of it. Thursday evening, Logan picked me up at the airport. He hugged me. He carried my bag. He said, "Welcome home, Pop. You look better. Florida agreed with you." I smiled and I said, "It did. I feel a lot better, son." Bridget met us at the front door. She'd made my favorite pot roast, the same recipe that had been making me sick for 6 months. She'd lit candles. She kissed my forehead. She said, "Daddy, I missed you so much." I sat down at my own dining room table. The table where Helen and I had sat for 31 years. The table where I had taught Bridget to do long division. The table where Logan had spread a forged deed across green, fell to a slumlord from New Haven. I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of meat. I put it in my mouth, and I chewed, and I swallowed. I let my daughter poison me one more time. For the case, for the evidence, I want you to understand what that took. I slept 4 hours that night, Friday at 7:55 a.m. I heard the cars on the street, 3 unmarked 2 cruisers. At 8 on the dot, the knock came. Logan answered it in his bathrobe. I watched from the top of the stairs as Detective Cosgrove showed him the warrant. He turned, very slowly, and he looked up at me on the landing. I want to tell you, he looked surprised. He didn't. He looked angry. The smile fell off his face like wet plaster. And underneath was a man I'd never met. A man with flat, dead eyes who was already calculating what he could say, what he could blame, who he could turn on. He looked at me on those stairs and he said, "You son of a bitch." I said, "Yes, Logan, I am." Bridget came out of the kitchen with a coffee cup in her hand. She saw the detectives. She saw the uniformed officers. She saw me at the top of the stairs in my pajamas. And the cup slipped out of her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor my father had laid down in 1962. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there, with her hands hanging at her sides, and looked at me with the face of a woman who'd been waiting to be caught for 6 months. They arrested Logan first. They cuffed him in the foyer. He went without a fight, but his eyes never left me. Bridget went second. They were gentler with her. She was crying by then, finally crying, sobbing the way she used to cry when she was 8 years old and had broken something she shouldn't have touched. She looked at me as they let her past, and she said, "Daddy, Daddy, please." And I want to tell you I stood firm. I want to tell you I was a rock. I wasn't. I sat down on the top step, and I put my face in my hands, and I cried like a man who just buried his only child. Because in a way, I had. The trial took 8 months. Logan got 22 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and operating an unlicensed gambling establishment. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a face like the side of a mountain, called him a man entirely without conscience in her sentencing remarks. He'll be eligible for parole in 2042. He'll be 60 when he gets out, if he gets out. Bridget pled out. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, controlled substance violations. 12 years. With good behavior, she might do 8. Her lawyer tried to argue she'd been coerced, that Logan had manipulated her, that she'd been a battered spouse. The prosecutors showed the video of her standing at my kitchen counter, alone, choosing to put the drops in the coffee. 3 days of video. 41 separate instances. The jury didn't take long. I went to see her once, at York Correctional, 6 weeks after she was sentenced. She came into the visiting room in her jumpsuit, and she sat down across the glass from me, and she picked up the phone. She said, "Daddy, I'm so sorry." I held the phone to my ear, and I looked at the daughter I'd raised, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac behind our house, the young woman I'd walked down the aisle 3 years ago, to a man I never trusted, and I said to her the only true thing I had left to say. I said, "Bridget, I know you are, and I forgive you the way a father forgives. But I'm not going to be in your life anymore. Not the visits, not the letters, not the parole hearings. When you get out, you and I are going to be strangers, because the cost of loving you was almost my life, and I don't have another life to spend." She put her hand on the glass. I didn't put mine up to meet it. I stood up, and I hung up the phone, and I walked out of that visiting room, and I didn't look back. Not once. And in the parking lot, I sat in my truck for 45 minutes before I could see well enough to drive. That was 1.5 years ago. The house I sold. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room had a memory I didn't want. Every corner had a camera angle I'd watched on Sutherland's laptop. I sold it to a young couple with 2 little girls, and the day the moving truck pulled out of the driveway, I drove across the street and rang Idris's doorbell. Idris is 83 now. Still sharp. Still scary. I told her I was leaving Connecticut. She said, "Where to?" I said, "Wherever the road takes me." She said, "Send me a postcard now and then, Roland, from wherever it takes you." I do. I send her one every month. From Nashville and Asheville and Savannah and a fishing town in the Florida Panhandle whose name I can't pronounce. I bought a small camper. I drive. I fish. I read. I joined an Elks Lodge in Tallahassee for 3 months and made some friends there. I've put on 20 pounds. My hands don't shake anymore. My hair is growing back in white instead of gray, which my doctor says is normal after that kind of toxic exposure. The poison was a slow-acting compound Logan had stolen from a pharmaceutical job years before he was fired. It would have killed me in another 4 to 6 weeks. People ask me sometimes, when I'm at a campground bar or a diner counter, and somebody starts a conversation, whether I have kids. I always tell them yes. I have a daughter. They ask how she's doing. I say she's working through some hard things. And I leave it there, because here's what I've learned about being a father at 68 years old, with the rest of my life out the windshield instead of the rearview mirror. You can love someone all the way down to the bone and still have to let them go. You can forgive someone and still walk away from them. The world will tell you that real love means infinite second chances. The world is wrong. Real love sometimes means looking your own child in the eye and saying, "I see you. I know what you did, and I'm not going to pretend I don't, because pretending is what gets old men killed in their own kitchens." I think about that brown bottle a lot. About all the times Bridget reached up into the cabinet above my refrigerator. About the one time she didn't. There was a piece of her in there somewhere that didn't want to do it. I have to believe that, or I can't live with what she was. But there was a bigger piece of her that did do it. 41 times that we caught on camera. God knows how many before. I drove past the old house last fall on my way through New England. The new family had a swing set in the backyard. There were pumpkins on the porch. The maple in the front yard had survived another ice storm. Idris's house was dark. She was visiting that niece in Florida, the real niece, the one who'd been my alibi. I sat at the curb for a few minutes with the engine running, and I thought about the man I'd been 1.5 years before, ringing a bell at his neighbor's door in a bathrobe because he was too tired to put on pants. Then I put the truck in gear and drove on. Because that man is gone, he died in slow motion in that house. The man who climbed out the other side, the man typing the story for whoever needs to hear it, is somebody else. Somebody who knows now that the most dangerous people in your life are not the strangers at your door. They are the people you taught to ride a bike. They are the people whose Christmas presents you wrapped for 40 straight years. They are the people who learned, sitting at your own kitchen table, exactly how you take your coffee. Pay attention to your coffee, friend. Pay attention to who pours it. And if your hands start shaking, and your hair starts falling out, and your memory starts slipping, and the people who love you keep telling you it's just old age, get a neighbor, get a friend, get a stranger if you have to. Get out of that house, and from a distance, with patient eyes and a quiet phone and a long enough lens, look back at the life you've been living and ask yourself one question. Who benefits when you're gone? The answer will tell you everything. I'm Roland McAfee. I'm 68 years old. I'm a long way from Ridgefield, Connecticut, and I'm never going back. The road is in front of me. The lights of the next town are coming up over the hill. There's a diner waiting somewhere with a cup of coffee I'm going to pour for myself, and for the first time in a very long time, I'm not afraid to drink it. I've had a lot of long nights to think about what happened in that house, and I want to tell you what I've come to believe, because I think it matters. Nothing that happened to me came out of nowhere. I keep going back to the sentence I said in my own kitchen 3 years ago, holding a coffee mug my dead wife bought at a craft fair. The house is yours someday anyway. I meant it as love. Logan heard it as a finish line. Bridget heard it as a permission slip. The same words can be a gift to a good heart and a loaded gun to a weak one, and the older I get, the more I think we owe it to ourselves to know which kind of heart we're handing things to before we hand them over. That isn't suspicion. That's wisdom. There is a difference. I also think about the 4 days between Idris's porch and that airport. I could have done 100 things in those 4 days. I could have collapsed. I could have begged. I could have screamed at my daughter across the dining room table. Instead, I sat still, and I watched, and I planned, and I ate food I knew was poisoning me because the long game was the only game that could save me. That isn't strength of the muscle kind. That's the kind of strength you only build by deciding, in the worst moment of your life, that you are still going to be the one thinking clearly when the smoke clears. Anybody my age who's reading this, you have more of that strength in you than you know. You've been building it your whole life and just calling it something else. Patience, stubbornness, showing up. Whatever you called it, use it now. And I think about my daughter, about forgiveness. People ask me if I forgive Bridget, and I tell them the truth, which is yes, the way a father forgives, and also no, the way a man forgives. Both can be true at once. Forgiveness doesn't mean handing someone the bottle again. Mercy without consequences is just enabling, and I almost died teaching myself that lesson. Real love sometimes looks like a closed door, and a closed door isn't cruelty. It's the last honest thing you can give a person who used your kindness as a weapon. If there is anything I want you to take from a stranger on the internet telling you the worst chapter of his life, it's this. Be a good person. Be a thinking person. Be a thinking person. Be a person who keeps going. Those 3 things are not separate. They feed each other. The day I stopped being all 3, I started dying. The day I picked them back up, on Idris Cavendish's porch, with a sealed bottle of water in my hand, was the day I started living again, at 68 years old, behind the wheel of a small camper, headed somewhere I hadn't been yet. The road is still in front of me. And it's in front of you, too.